out. And now I'm going to pass the presentation over to John.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining our webinar. Hopefully you're seeing the same introductory slide that Rebecca showed, and thank you, Rebecca, for the introduction, and thank you to my co-presenters for being here today. We're gonna move fairly quickly through this, but really post your questions, and we'll take time at the end to cover this. So the first part of the webinar is some material that was first slide prepared by our colleagues at MassDEP. Michael Salona and Jessa Soberski work extensively in the lead program, in the DEP drinking water program, and others of us, our contact information is here. So fundamentally, and you perhaps know this very well, lead is a toxic metal. We don't have any use for it in our bodies. When it's in water in a dissolved state, it has no taste, no odor, you can't see it. And unfortunately, that's the case for it. And unfortunately, it also is a very useful metal for a lot of reasons for industry and materials over the years. So thus, it has been used, and unfortunately, it's been used in things that come in contact with air, water, and people. So lead paints up there, lead in gasoline was used extensively as an anti-knock compound. Fortunately, we've removed those two things largely from the least use of anything new, and pretty extensively from past use of it. So some of you may be aware with those various programs, there is still contaminated soil with lead chips and lead paint. And by and large, the level of lead in humans' blood in the United States has dropped steadily since the 70s. But as we've learned, there is no safe level of lead at all. And the most people at risk are infants, pregnant women, young children. So it's a neurotoxin. So it affects development, and even at low levels, epidemiological studies have shown association with a lower IQ, decreased ability to pay attention. So this comes from the public health sector, not at all my area of expertise, but I'm just telling you about that. I'm an environmental engineer. So sources of lead. We mentioned this. We've got things in paint, things in the soil, things in certain products. And the one we're going to talk about today is sometimes lead can be in water. And depending on your consumption of water, and particularly if you're an infant or a small child, and infants with mixed formula, lead in water can be, on occasion, a significant source of lead, and one that we want to eliminate. So how does lead get in drinking water? Lead is not very infrequently naturally occurring in source water. Almost never. I've never come across that case in my 40 years in the business. However, the materials that we use to provide water very conveniently to us here, particularly in the United States, unfortunately have involved lead in the materials. Sometimes pure lead in the pipes and lead service lines. The lead service line is shown here. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but then also the plumbing we use in our houses includes brass, lead-containing solder, and some fixtures, some pipes and connections that contain lead. So unfortunately, it's in our properties, in our buildings. It's private sector material, so it's a challenge for the public sector to work with society and rid ourselves of these materials. And we've been a bit slow at that, I would say, from my perspective, looking at the industry. So in general, most facilities' water is supplied by a community or public water system. We sometimes call that a PWS. Those systems are regulated by MassDEP, and that water is provided to us. In schools and childcare facility in Massachusetts, there's currently no required testing of water for a particular constituent like lead or copper. There's some very limited testing has been done over the years by MassDEP, which actually in the country has been a very proactive agency relative to a lot of state agencies in this arena. In fact, this voluntary program that we're reporting on today actually began almost 7 years ago, and myself and my colleague Dave Rickow worked with MassDEP as Governor Baker launched our program. So there's no, but that's going to change, actually. There's going to be some requirements coming starting in 2024 where public water systems are going to be required to reach out to all schools and childcare facilities and offer free testing of up to 5 locations at a school and 2 at a childcare facility. And MassDEP is working to help because it is a EPA regulation, part of what's called the lead and copper rule revisions, then they're working with them to make that happen. So this program was initiated in May of 2016, in large part because of the really disastrous things that happened in Flint, Michigan, that brought the issue to light in a bigger way, not that it was unknown, about lead, possibility of lead contamination in drinking water and its impact on children. Um, uh, so Massachusetts launched a voluntary program, and in the first 8 months of that program, from June of 2016 to February, March of 2017, we actually, a massive group of people collected samples from about 800 schools and gathered that information, measured lead and copper at a significant cost. And myself, Rick Larson, and Kate Gallagher on this call were actually involved from that very beginning point and have been involved since then. So the expanded program was started in January of 2020 based on federal funding from the US EPA to the state of Massachusetts under something called the Water Infrastructure Improvements for the Nation Act. And it has produced a lot of good things and funding to do this work. So we at UMass have staff that work hand in hand with DEP to implement this voluntary program. It's not regulated, to provide free guidance, sampling, analysis of water samples, now for lead only. And this webinar today tells you a good bit about the details of that as we move along. There's a lot of training and educational materials available on the web and also via various contacts. And this is one example of the kind of thing we do: outreach, webinars, and other things. I'm going to hand the presentation over to Julian Honey, who will present to us some information about an opportunity to get funding to not just find out if the water has lead, but also to do some remedial activity to get a device to remove lead. So, Julian?
Yeah, so thanks for that introduction, John. Like he said, we have those resources through UMass and DEP to do the testing. And the organization I work for, the Massachusetts Clean Water Trust, runs a program called the School Water Improvement Grants. And that's really about providing funding to replace those detectable lead fixtures. So how SWIG works, and it's a pretty fundamentally basic program. We're testing, we're replacing, and then retesting to make sure everything's eliminated. But the first step of eligibility is to complete water quality sampling using MassDEP's LCCA procedures, and then having that data loaded up into the LCCA program management tool, which is just a publicly accessible database. After that, once you have your eligible results, you'd go ahead and apply to the SWIG program, and you would be applying to replace those fixtures that came back with detectable lead. Once reviewed and approved by our board, we would go ahead and have those voted for approximately $3,000 per fixture to go ahead and replace those lead positive bubblers and water fountains. And those grants allow for up to 1 year to procure, install, and then resample any of those replaced water fillers. At that point, during the closeout, like I said, we would have that resampling take place through the assistance of DEP and UMass, who's on this call. And then if there's any residual funds left over, those can be retained for future operations and maintenance, which 99% of the time is going to be purchasing replacement filters to put into your new filling stations. So if you'll go back just one to the eligible recipients. So right now we have open rolling applications for our round 2 of the SWIG program. Eligible recipients are public and private schools ages K through 12, public and private early education facilities, so Head Start programs or anything like that, and public and private non-residential daycares. At this time, the only ineligible recipients are family daycares. And then to be eligible, you have to complete that first step of getting your water quality sampling tested and either do it yourself and upload it to the LCCA or use DEP's technical assistance program and make sure that it all gets loaded so that it's publicly accessible. So then as far as what fixtures are eligible for replacement, grant funds are awarded for the replacement of universally accessible water fountains, chillers, and bubblers. So in this case, universally accessible is defined as hallways, libraries, cafeterias, gyms, or really areas outside of the classroom. Fixtures may be relocated to maximize the use of a filling station. So if there's certain hallways or corridors where there isn't that much foot traffic or not too many students congregate in those areas, you are able to relocate where you put that new filling station just to make sure you're maximizing the usage. And then there is a little more flexibility for facilities that care for infants and toddlers, specifically pre-kindergarten age students, which can include shared kitchens or food prep areas. And on the next slide, we have more information about this. So right now we're working with our colleagues at EPA to revise our guidelines and allow lead positive classroom faucets in pre-K aged classrooms that would allow the installation of under sink point of use filters. There's a couple advantages that come along with this. So it allows for in-classroom water access. These under sink units are much cheaper than bottle filling stations. So it allows for additional use of funds for future filters, as well as because they're cheaper and easier to install, there's an opportunity to put more of them in classrooms across your facility. And while this isn't finalized yet, I would encourage you to reach out to us either with a round 1 application or to contact me. My contact information is going to be in these slides if you have been tested and found positive results. So then just to briefly walk through the application process, it's a 2-part application. The first part is the organization form, which is really just a screening process. You're going to fill out a short 9-question form through a form stack link. It's kind of like a Google form. And it's really just to make sure that we're ticking that box that you've been tested and that you have eligible fixtures. If you have not, at that point, we would refer you to our colleagues who are on this call, who would be able to help you out with getting tested. And then the part 2 application is a lot more detailed. We're going to be collecting administrative information about your organization and information about your facility, down to fixture locations and facility maps, so we can make sure that we're getting the right fixtures replaced. Then here's an example of that part 1 form. So we're just grabbing your name, your DESI or EEC organization code if you're childcare, the type of facility you are, as well as information about the point of contact and the number of facilities that you're going to be applying for. And then once you've submitted that to us within 5 days, we'll go ahead and confirm those results or refer you to our colleagues at DEP to get tested. And then that part 2 form is the more detailed part of the application process. It's got detailed application instructions, detailed organization data, and it includes space to apply for 10 facilities at a time. You can apply for more. So we have had 20, 30 schools on some of those larger school districts apply for that many, and you can really apply for as many as you like. The only constraint is the grants need to be completed in 1 year. So we would ask that you're only going to be applying for the number of schools that you think you could reasonably procure, install, and then retest in that 1 year. The other thing I would draw your attention to is the federal government recently transitioned from using DUNS numbers to the Unique Entity ID, or a UEI. So if you are a childcare and you're filling out that Part 2 application because you have eligible fixtures to replace, I would just recommend starting that process on sam.gov, because I have heard that it can take a couple weeks to get that number assigned. So if you have any questions about that, there's a lot of helpful web pages that I can direct you to as well if you reach out. So then, regarding the award process, we have an award calculation to determine the maximum fixture award amount. Loosely, that's 100 students to one fixture, rounded up to the highest whole number. So let's say you have a facility with 350 students. We would round that up to 400, or 4 fixtures. So if you had 4 lead positive water fountains, that would be the maximum you'd be able to replace in that facility. At that point, once it's been voted by our board of trustees, we would be sending you an award letter, which details the total award amounts by facility, as well as the grant requirements and information on executing the agreement. We would be asking you to complete a grant questionnaire, which is going to be providing financial information to the trust, which is the organization I work for, and ensuring that for those private childcares, you're meeting specific federal requirements. And then we'd also be issuing you a grant agreement, which, as I said, establishes that 1-year timeline. It establishes the use of funds parameters and requires that the work meets state and local code and permitting requirements. It also requires that the grantees certify to MassDEP's issued operation and maintenance guidelines, and to certify the post-installation testing and uploading of those retests to the LCCA. And then we will go ahead and verify account information and set up a call with you prior to funds being dispersed, to serve as sort of a last jumping off point to make sure that the project is all set and you don't have any further questions before you go out and purchase those new stations. So then, regarding the interim activities and the procurement and installation, there's 2 different types of groups we're working for. There's eligible and non-eligible grantees. So public school districts may be required to procure fixtures through the statewide negotiated contract of the Operation Service Division's FAC 100. Procured fixtures must meet the minimum required technical standards issued by DEP. They may be procured using OSD's tradesperson installation, repair, and maintenance statewide contract. And grantees are required to install all fixtures in a quote-unquote workmanlike fashion that meets state and local code and permit requirements. Grantees have to ensure that fixtures are installed as allocated by the schools. And same as these other scenarios, the unspent funds can be retained for future operation and maintenance. And typically for our public school districts, you already have a procurement process that is going to follow these guidelines, and we do just like to draw attention to it. And then for the non-eligible grantees, which is going to be private facilities, you're required to collect 3 detailed and itemized quotes for the filling stations. And we do recommend using the statewide contract as a jumping off point, because a lot of these contractors have already been vetted by the Commonwealth. But additionally, at the time of your grant being sent out, we'll provide you forms to fill out so that you can, fill in a contact log of procurement to ensure that you're going to be meeting those requirements. So then, going back to the project closeout, if you go back one, yeah, there you go. So to then close out the grant, we will be assisting you by sending notifications first when the money goes out, and then about approximately 6 and 9 months after the funds have been received. On our end, we provide quarterly reports to the EPA and to our board of trustees, and we really serve as a open line of communication. So if you're having an issue with getting bids, you can talk to us. If you have questions, just to make sure that you're doing everything correctly, you can always reach out. And then as far as the eligible use of funds, you can purchase those units, you can hire the labor to install and replace them, It is also accessible to use in-house labor if that's something that you have within your organization's capabilities. You can use it to purchase filters. You can use it to purchase retesting, though I would recommend using our wonderful colleagues on this call here. And then you can keep those funds for the filters going forward. And that's all we have for you today. Like I said, it's sort of that simple process of test, replace, retest. My information, as well as my colleague Jonathan Maple, who couldn't make it today, but was one of the people who set up this program in the first place, is on here. And then on the next slide, I believe, let's see, is all the useful links we have for you. So the top one being MassDEP's assistance program, the second one being that database, and then down towards the bottom, the preliminary application that you'd fill out to get into our program. So I did see a couple questions that came in, and I'm looking forward to answering those at the end of the presentation, but you can also feel free to email me directly. And I think these slides should be sent out to everyone once we finish up.
Yep, these slides are actually in the materials link that you can access right now, and there'll also be a link in the follow-up email.
Excellent. So then we are going to have a poll break here, and I think it should pop up once John hits.
Yep, should be up now. If for some reason you're having trouble seeing the submit button, just hit the zoom out or the minus sign that should be like on the side of your screen. We have like about half the attendees voted. I'll give everyone a few more seconds. I think that's about what we're going to get. So I'm going to end and share the results. Okay, so 18% said yes, they have participated in the voluntary assistance program. 29% said no. 18% said I don't know. And there's a third of the audience that is just not applicable to them. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I believe it'll just go on to the next person. Oh, next question. That's right. Sorry. Has your facility had sampling and analysis for lead outside of the MassDEP program? And I'll give everyone a couple more seconds to submit their answer. Okay. And the results are 21% said yes, they have sampled outside of the MassDEP program. 16% said no, they haven't. 21% didn't know. And bigger chunk, 42%, said the question wasn't applicable to them. All right, on to the next presenter.
Morning, my name is Rick Larson, and I try to administer this program on the end for DEP. I won't spend a lot of time on this slide. This just explains the different aspects of the program that we're going to go through in the following slides. but I'll discuss the application. Once the application is received electronically by DEP, technical assistance provider will give you a call or send you an email. And during that call and email, we'll be trying to determine where your fixtures are, and generally for larger systems um, or larger childcare facilities and schools, we ask that you send us a floor map. If you're a school, you've seen them in every classroom you've ever been in because it's required by the fire code. It's just the escape route. And that's a good plan to show an overview of the facility. And then on that thing, we will designate where the fixtures are. We will give them a number starting from 1 to 100 or 200, how many ever you have. And then we will use that to plan the sequence in which we collect samples or you collect them. And once we get you the proper number of bottles and labels, if you're home child care, you will conduct the sampling yourself, and we would generally have you either drop off the samples yourself at a shipping point for FedEx, or we will have a courier come get them, which is sort of rare. And then they will go to the laboratory where they will be analyzed, and the lab results get reported to us, and we will inform you of what they were. And then the follow-up steps will be whatever remediation you may have if you have detectable lead or lead-positive fixtures. At which point we will send you a certificate of completion and a couple of free filters to go on a pitcher, the Brita pitchers, for which we have a number of filters to give out. Okay, for the application form, there's the link for it, and if you just go to that link, it's the MassDEP link, and here's an example of what the application form looks like. That's a Spanish translation of it, and we have Spanish-speaking individuals who'll be glad to walk people through the application form and explain the program if they don't understand me. The outreach will, like I said earlier, consist of a phone call from a technical assistance provider, and we have about half a dozen people that will call. For the larger facilities, our TAPs will go out and collect the samples themselves. And like I said, for family child cares, they will be collected by the owner. Once we get the map, this is an example of a map, and try not to squint too hard reading it. It's a very big facility with a number of fixtures, and as you can see, the handwritten designations there are for each fixture, and this is what we use to determine the sequence of collecting the samples. They will be water bubblers or water chillers that are often mounted on a wall, and those are the ones that are eligible for the SWIG program. There's also classroom sinks and bubblers in most elementary and middle schools, and we will test those, but those aren't eligible at this point for replacement. Let's see. Yeah, the classroom sink is the most common fixture, but there are also kitchen kettles and food prep sinks and refrigerator taps that we will test as well. Let's see, I guess next slide. Here's a couple of examples of kitchen sinks, which we will test. When we run the test, Kate will go over this with you, but we do 2 sample collections per fixture. We get the first flush that immediately comes out when we turn the water on, and then we run the same water tap for 30 seconds and collect a second sample, which will tell us what's in the pipe behind the fixture as compared to what's sitting against the fixture overnight when we collect the sample. And the the first sample should be higher in concentration of lead, if there's lead in there, than the second one. And we compare the two. We take the laboratory analysis, or the laboratory results, and put it in electronically in what we refer to as the program management tool. It's online, and the technical assistance provider will do the data entry for anyone's fixtures, for every fixture that's in your facility. And the result, once the tap has done that, uh, assuming the laboratory gets everything correct and the data is uploaded, it goes into that tool, and it's a permanent record of the lead concentrations, if any, in each fixture. There is also a portal available with which Julian alluded to, where you can go in and look at the results for any fixture in any childcare facility or school in Massachusetts. And this is just the front page of the management tool that the technical assistance provider will be looking at when they set up and enter the data into the or enter the fixture data into the tool. And I think that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Kate Gallagher. I'm a technical assistance provider, and I get the, honor to explain how we collect water samples. So to schedule your sample collections, we have to both have the sample plans and maps for sometimes maps for home daycares are not necessary, but definitely maps for larger facilities are very helpful. With the sample plans, we can create labels and chain of custody forms, which are explained later on. Sometimes the TAP does both. Okay, that was a little quick, John. I lost my place. Sometimes the TAP does both steps on site along with sampling when they arrive, if they're arriving to your facility. The pandemic definitely changed that for us. We don't generally go and knock on your door. The TAP also will assign a lab for your facility so that you get sample bottles and analysis from the same lab. Sampling is scheduled once the bottles are sent to the provider, and the TAP can schedule that sample collection event with you. Next slide, please. So in order to sample, again, we must have actual conditions. We don't want to have people running their faucets and stuff in advance to try to clear anything out of the piping to sort of prepare. We need to know what is actually happening so everybody gets a really good idea of actual conditions. There is a stagnation period or an inactive period for 8 to 18 hours where you don't use the water before sample collection. Overnight is easiest, especially for home daycares if you're not using it overnight. But given special circumstances in homes where people work at night or somebody wakes up before somebody else, all of those things can be discussed, and we can get to a place where we can have an inactive period before we collect samples. So what you need to know is that we do not and cannot collect samples after a long weekend, a long holiday, or vacation, since the water will be in the pipes for too long and could create a false positive scenario. There are the two samples that are collected, which Rick was talking about earlier. The first draw is called a primary sample. We would always label that P for primary. And the second draw is a flush sample, which is collected after a 30-second flush. Again, for this program, it's actual conditions. We don't clean screens or aerators, and just stick to the very simple first draw, run the water 30 seconds, second draw. Next, please. So in order to collect, you will need the 250 ml sample bottles. They're provided by the lab. Some people prefer to have a clipboard. I don't care if you have a clipboard, but you're going to need a pen, a timer, the timer on your cell phone or a watch if you don't have a cell phone, a black magic marker. I like Sharpies that are waterproof, but whatever. And of course, that chain of custody form that's specific to your program or school or facility, which I would provide to you if I was your TAP. Also, there are labels that we create and provide for you that you would need. Next, please. So each location requires 2 bottles, but may only require 1 if a flush sample is not required. That's a later slide. So what we would do, you see the picture on the left depicts how we wrote on top of the bottle. So I write the location code, which is a 3-digit number, 001 or 002, so forth and so on, right up to however many locations you have. And we would put 001P for primary and 001F for flush on the tops of the bottles. So we would collect the water sample 001P first. The first use of the water goes right in the bottle, and then record that time on the chain of custody. Then we would flush the faucet for 30 seconds, collect the second sample and label that 001F as in flush, and write the time of that on the chain of custody. So we fill out the labels entirely and affix the label to the bottle with the corresponding location code so that the labels and the chain of custody have the same information. And it's the same for each location. 002P and 002F and so forth are all the same protocol. This is an example of the labels that we create. This is one that I would email to my facilities. Sometimes the labs usually include their own. As long as all the information is on the label, I don't think it matters if you use mine or theirs. But you see, I want to point out one thing that's not actually in a bubble here. The org code is specific to each facility. The location code, everybody's going to have a 001 and a 002, presumably. And that would change to facility. If your location that you're sampling is the kitchen sink, and that's the first one, that would be 001P and 001F for the kitchen sink. But that location code, everyone should have a 1 and a 2 and so forth. The org code is important. That's specific only to your facility. Next, please. So the chain of custody is a legal document that tracks the sample from collection through results to ensure integrity of both the sample and the results. Excuse me. The chain of custody is emailed to the facilities and you print it, fill it out, and relinquish it. So, okay, this is a copy of, that's an example. There's 2 locations there, so you see it only goes to 002 P and F. That's probably for a home daycare. Next, please. And here are the where you fill it out. The first bubble gets just UMass as the client. The second bubble is the sampler's name. Again, since the pandemic, we've been doing less physically sampling and more of telling people how to sample. That blue arrow that you see is where I put the date, because in bubble 3, that is that little box. They ask for the date and the time. So I just put the date once in the big box and then put the time in the little box. I hope that makes sense to you. Next, please. At the end of the chain, there's a relinquish area. Relinquish just means I'm legally handing over these samples to you, and I'm saying that they were correct when they were taken and everything's correct that I've written down. So now it's your responsibility to keep them correct. And so there's the relinquish and the date and time. And then one other little thing on the chain, if we can go back for a second. The second red bubble there is the page number. For larger facilities, it's easy to lose a page. And if you number them, you know what page you've lost. And that helps the lab as well, especially if there's like 10 pages to your chain. Okay, we can go on. The only time the sampling protocol changes is if you have what's called divergent piping. Paired drinking water bubblers and some classroom sinks share a main water pipe that splits to provide water to 2 or 3 fixtures. A primary sample is taken from all fixtures, hence the PP, and then only one flush sample is taken. So the sampling protocol for divergent piping goes from PF to PPF. Next, please. There are certainly places we don't want to skip when we collect samples, and that would be a hallway water cooler or bubbler, where there is quite a lot of access by the students, and also the nurse's office sink. But I do want to point out that the teacher's lounge sink and the nurse's office sink, we only collect from the cold. Of course, the bottle fills, the sequence there is primary from the bottle fill and a primary and a flush from the bubbler. And just to reiterate, there's a paragraph here about the $3,000 per fixture installed for facilities to replace fountains with lead greater than 1 part per billion based on appropriate testing procedures. And that was what Julian talked about earlier. The places we do not collect samples from are places primarily intended not for drinking water, like the custodial washing sinks and slop sinks. Bathroom sinks I will sometimes include, but I do want to, if you're from a facility, best practices for chemistry labs, for art rooms, and for bathroom sinks are to post not for drinking water, for hand washing only, or washing dishes. I don't know what, like the art rooms are a little bit tricky, just not for drinking. But the science labs, there should be a procedure, a protocol where drinking is not encouraged from the sinks in the science lab. Occasionally I'll find that people do use it for personal use, and if I can't convince them, I'll put it on the sample plan. So the last, after everything is collected, there's several options for pickup. If the tap was there, I will bring it to the lab for you. If the lab is close and they've delivered your bottles, they can pick them up. Mostly what we've seen happen since the pandemic is I print up a FedEx label and get it to the facility, and when they're done, they box up their bottles again and they bring it to the nearest Walgreens and FedEx it back to the lab. And that seems to be working really easy for everybody. Just a side note on the coolers, there's one lab that we use that uses coolers, but not so much as they used to anymore. So we just don't have to, there's no special requirements for handling them. Chuck them in a box, put them back in the cooler, send them back to the lab. I'll help with everything. So occasionally something goes wrong in the field, and because we deal with a lot of volume often, little things can go wrong, but we don't panic. What we do is we just figure out how we can best address it. So if we've missed a location, you can simply add it to the end of the chain of custody. If a location is no longer being used, simply cross it off, write not in use, and put your initials on it like you would a normal sample. If you run out of bottles, do as much as you can, and then please let me know. And I think I'm done there, right, John? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Kate, for that. We've got a few more slides, and I want to leave some time for questions, so I'm going to really blast through this. And in general, we use a lab that certified the state of Massachusetts. The results are are electronically uploaded to DEP. DEP checks, make sure they're okay, and then they end up in the management tool. We send you a file with the results that we also send to the public water supplier, DPH, MassDEP, EPA Region 1 is interested. So we send a lot of people aware of that sampling was undertaken. And you can also look at that EEA portal and look at things online. And Mass Department of Public Health also follows up with some information. Let's see here. I tap here. This is an example of results that we send. So the upper part says the lab, and explains the different kinds of samples. And this is a result we love to see, which is a childcare facility. It had three sinks. We have the first draw of the P, as Kate describes, and the flush. And wonderful, all the flush samples non-detect, and we'll refer back to this. And even the first draw samples in this case were barely detectable. Really excellent result. Going back, what do we find? I guess the simple picture is that most places have at least one fixture, one sample with a lead greater than 1 part per billion. Almost everybody does. Only 4 facilities back in our early testing only had that. But almost all the flush samples are low. And most of the samples, it's just most of the facilities have something. Our current program, if I just look at the last, say, 300 facilities or so, mostly childcare facilities, it's really wonderful that 34% of those facilities had all the samples non-detect, first draw and flush, which is really great. It means that the materials being used there to provide drinking water are more and more not lead-containing materials. And 62% of the facilities had all samples of the flush samples at 1 ppb or less. So one of the best short-term, immediate things that can be done to limit lead exposure is always flush a tap before taking water for drinking or cooking. Do it every time you take water. The follow-up is notifying consumers, your people who come to your facility. There's a lot of tools available, fact sheets, templates from DPH and DEP. So there's a lot of follow-up. Generally on remedial actions, we sort of tier them based on the level. I'm going to show you a table in a second. We tier them based on the level of lead that's there. If it's particularly high, we say shut it off and don't use it. We might implement a flushing program. We would like to replace plumbing or install a point-of-use lead removal device like the SWIG program, and develop a plan and take action. This is one of DP prepared tables that just shows things going from high to low. We want to get everything under 1 part per billion. By the way, that's the most stringent guideline in the country for that particular number. This is a document that's available online at the MassDEP site that lists for over 15, 1 to 15, and under 1 part per billion. And this is guidance that's consistent with EPA, DEP, DPH in these areas. So this is just from early in the program here in Amherst, where I happen to sit, some old fixtures on the left and new fixtures on the right. You see things like older brass, copper solder with probably lead in it, things like that. So that can be done. So what's the best? The best thing is to remove anything that has lead in it. Where are we at with that? Unfortunately, prior to 1986, there were no requirements on particular materials. Since 86, we had elimination of lead in solder, elimination of lead pipes, but there was a fair amount of lead allowed to be in brass up until 2011 law, which came into effect in 2014. So for almost the last decade, there's been very, very, very low levels, if any, in lead in plumbing materials. Public water systems treat their water to minimize corrosion problems with lead, and that's a requirement. Flushing of fixtures is great. It's short term, and we don't know how long it's effective, so you need to do it every time. And obviously, kids and particularly infants are not going to do that. So doing point-of-use filters, we've mentioned SWIG grants for bottle fill stations. Under sink filters have been mentioned, and we distribute some Brita filters that Brita donated to us, and we also have other things. So all these steps are possible. So this is just, again, some more contact information for some of us. It's scattered throughout the presentation, and we got a couple of minutes to answer a couple of questions that I guess Rebecca can pick out what to ask us. So thank you.
Sure. Before daycare is given a permit, they're not required to complete a lead evaluation and water sampling, correct? And why is that?
I believe the answer is correct, and the why is beyond my. I think that would go to DEEC. Certainly, I don't know. We don't have regulators, any of us who are presenting. So, um, seems like a reasonable approach to me, but maybe it's a burden that is hard to overcome.
Okay. The applications, and this is when Julian was speaking, are the applications translated?
So we have application materials and instructions all available in Spanish. As far as other languages, not at the moment, but that could be something we could talk about. If you have a specific language, you could reach out. But yeah, otherwise, everything on our website we have in Spanish as well.
Thank you. Many childcare providers will likely not have the capacity to complete the application process. Can a government entity submit the application on their behalf?
If that's for SWIG,
I believe
not,
that was during that one.
okay.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar. So I haven't experienced anyone being unable to, including when there's been like a language barrier and people who their primary language is Spanish. I don't see a reason why there couldn't be assistance in completing the application. But if there's a specific example or you know of a specific facility who is having issues, I would urge you to reach out to me.
Okay, thank you. Are facilities given a rough cost of replacement filters and how often they need to be replaced? Because this is a cost they're going to have to include in their budget.
So my science folks can correct me. Is it every 3,000 gallons they need to be replaced?
The filters that are rated by NSF ANSI do have a replacement frequency. It's a challenging question, but one should, because we're actually shooting for a level of lead that's much lower than the certification level. And so I think just planning on some periodic budgeted replacement frequency is the best idea to do right now. And it certainly, the gallons, they're usually based on a volume. The gallons treated, it should be followed. So yes, periodic replacement is required, and it does need to be budgeted.
Yeah, the focus of the question was the cost.
Okay. Off the top of my head, I want to say, so the most common fixture we see put in is the LK Easy H2O. I think that ranges between about $60 to $90. You can find those in Home Depot, Amazon, all kinds of different places. But I think that can change based off of a number of factors.
Okay, great. Great information. Glad to see there's a source of very detailed information for schools and daycares. Is it okay to share this presentation with our local school board or superintendent and board of health?
Yes. Absolutely.
Encouraged. Okay. Access to the LCCA program management tool. So as TAPS, do we need to log in access to see or download any lead data from the MassDEP lead data tool? Sorry, that came out a little. So they're talking about the LCAA program tool. Do TAPS need to log in to see or download the data?
Sounds like it's coming from either Marianne or Luz, one of our people who are watching this. But we can cover that later today if it was from one of them. TAPS are people working in our program. It's not a login. The tool website is based on a PIN, a code for each facility that we assign a facility or a group of facilities. Basically, it's for the facility director to be able to use to get to that program management tool.
Okay. And that was a tap it was actually our CAP staff. So
Yeah,
our
yeah.
client
So
staff.
it's a not a logging in as a person. It's a code that's for either this one facility or could be 50. For example, the city of Springfield has one pin for 40 or 50 schools in their public school system. Worcester, Boston,
Okay.
things like that. So,
Okay. That's it for questions
all right.
in the chat. It's 11:01. Great timing.
Great. Thank you. Thanks everybody for attending, and reach out to us.